Clinging on to power, the Prime Minister remains defiant, despite dozens of ministers resigning and his own cabinet telling him time is up.
Will you be Prime Minister tomorrow?
Of course. The job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
37 MPs have quit the government in the last 24 hours as former allies turn against Boris Johnson.
At some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now.
It has been an extraordinary day at Downing Street. Right now, we understand some of the cabinet are gathered behind me in number 10, telling the Prime Minister he must resign. So, can he survive? Also ahead, who's looking at fixing the economy, the concerns of voters facing a cost of living crisis. Away from here, summer holiday chaos as British Airways axes 10,000 flights. And football's kicking off too. The Women's Euros get underway tonight with the Lionesses ready to roar.
Men have had all the money, all the stardom, everything on a plate. Now it's time for the ladies.
From Downing Street, this is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening from Downing Street, where a defiant Prime Minister has tonight returned, even as dozens of his own MPs demand he quit. Right now, behind that black door behind me, Cabinet members are, we understand, engaged in a showdown with the PM. Their clear message: it's over. What started with 2 shock cabinet departures just 24 hours ago has now become a chorus of calls for Boris Johnson to resign. There were fiery exchanges at Prime Minister's questions this lunchtime, his authority suffering blow after blow. Within hours, he faced another grilling before a senior committee of MPs. All the while, a constant stream of Conservatives declaring their leader had lost their confidence and should go. Now, so far, he has resisted the mounting pressure, insisting that he will stay on in the job. We will assess his options a bit later. But first, on a day of huge drama here in Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
If you can measure the trouble you're in by the number of cameras stationed outside your front door, the Prime Minister only had to glance out of the window to know he's in very serious straits indeed.
Is it all over, Prime Minister?
A defiant wave as he left the Prime Minister's questions, but to ever-increasing numbers in his party, he's a leader who's run out of answers. As his convoy headed into Parliament, the resignations from his government continued to roll in. His greatest danger now, not the delighted benches opposite him, but the frozen faces of the party behind him. Characteristic of him that he tried to make light of it.
This morning, Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I expect I shall have further such meetings later today.
But that laughter soon died with this.
What a pathetic spectacle. The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade.
The faces of the remaining loyalists on his front bench showing they were not enjoying the line of attack. And then one after the other, his own backbenchers wielded the knife.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
Today I ask him to do the honourable thing.
Take responsibility and resign.
Frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
But how long can he go on with ministers deserting him so fast it's hard to keep score? It started with his health secretary, followed by the Chancellor. By the end of yesterday, 8 others had joined them. Before breakfast today, Ministers Laura Trott and Will Quince also resigned. The total so far stands at 38.
Morning, Mr. Javid.
The man who started it all looked pretty buoyant as he left to tell everyone why he'd had to go.
Treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And, Mr. Speaker, I will never risk losing my integrity. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough.
The Prime Minister looked into the middle distance. The expressions on the faces of his party reflected a grimmer story. As well as the ticking tally of resignations, the letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership are piling up. His next date with destiny facing a committee of MPs where 8 out of the 9 Tories questioning him had already withdrawn their support.
Prime Minister, how's your week going?
Terrific. Like many others.
One committee member on his phone on the left here actually sent his letter of no confidence while the Prime Minister was sitting in front of him.
I need you to answer this question, Prime Minister.
The chair keen to establish that the Prime Minister is prepared to stand down rather than call an early election.
If you have lost the confidence of your MPs and you're required to step down as leader of the Conservative Party, you will not seek to dissolve Parliament.
Well, I think the last thing this country needs, but I'm not going to step down, and the last thing this country needs, frankly, is election.
And still his day was about to get worse.
It's being reported that there's a delegation of your cabinet colleagues waiting in Downing Street, including the Chief Whip, the Transport Secretary and your new Chancellor, waiting to tell you when you finish here today that it's time for you to go.
And indeed, some of his cabinet were heading to number 10. The Welsh Secretary, Simon Hart, followed by Grant Shapps.
Is the government collapsing, Mr. Shapps?
And even one of Boris Johnson's staunchest allies, Nadine Dorries. The cornered Prime Minister has made it clear he'll have to be forced out of number 10. Behind this door, his cabinet might be about to try. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, there's an awful lot to get through this evening with events developing rapidly, and who knows what could happen before we come off air. But let's talk to our political editor, Robert Peston. Robert, what is going on behind that door right now?
So, a series of ministers, actually the Chancellor who was appointed yesterday, Nadhim Zahawi, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, ultra Boris Johnson loyalists, the Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, plus the sort of shop steward for Tory MPs, a chap called Sir Graham Brady. They are explaining some numbers, some maths to the Prime Minister that are devastating for him. And there are two kinds of numbers that are devastating for him. First of all, we've seen, as you pointed out, 37 members of the government resign in the last 24 hours. A tiny number of those have been replaced. That's more than a fifth of the government. And what ministers, the Chief Whip, are saying to him is, where are you going to replace them from? There are no backbenchers of requisite ability or indeed desire to take those jobs. So they're saying, under your leadership, people won't work for you, government can't function. So that's one appalling bit of news for the Prime Minister. The second really appalling bit of news for the Prime Minister is, again, if you look at the people who've resigned today, and then you add to that the 41% of his MPs who very recently said they had no confidence in the Prime Minister, it's now completely clear that, well, I say completely clear, it's, I'm told, pretty clear that more than half of his MPs want him to go. They have lost confidence in him. Now, he may say, well, there's no election and therefore I can't be forced out. But the reality is he has to go when that many people are against him. And I am told by senior members of the party, it's not if he goes, it's when. And they want him to go, well, within the next few hours.
Fascinating. Robert, thank you very much. We'll be back to you later in the programme. All day, there has been a pretty mutinous feel within Tory ranks, and the PM seemed unable to stem the tide of rising anger. His assertions that he would continue in post did little to win round weary MPs, and with each hour, support he could once rely upon seemed simply to ebb away. Our political correspondent Daniel Hewitt has more on what has now become an out-and-out rebellion.
If you wanted a front row seat to the biggest drama in town, then today these slightly bemused tourists outside Parliament had bagged prime position. They watched on as Westminster whipped itself into a frenzy, struggling to keep up with every twist and turn as Conservative MPs held the Prime Minister's fate in their hands. Do you think it's all over now for the Prime Minister?
This was a really tragic moment, and I supported Boris Johnson. I worked to help him get an 80-seat majority. This is a really tragic moment. I'm very sorry it's come to this.
What do you think should happen?
Let's see what happens. There's a meeting of the 1922 committee at 5 p.m. that I think is going to be addressed by Dominic Raab. Let's see what the mood is at the 22 at 5 o'clock.
What's the mood in the party right now, do you think?
As I say, let's see what the mood is at 5 o'clock.
Thanks, Mark. Maria Miller.
I'm so sorry, we're actually in the middle of doing a photograph.
Just a very quick question.
No, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of a meeting.
Inside Parliament, others were less reluctant to speak their minds, as MPs who backed Boris Johnson just 4 weeks ago now called for him to go.
So I've never done this before. I've never ever voted against a sitting Prime Minister. I think he needs to listen to the MPs. I regard myself as a loyal Conservative, and I found this very, very difficult to do. But I've had enough. The public have had enough.
Given how loyal you've been to Boris Johnson, given he has relied on your loyalty, it could be MPs like yourself that tip him over the edge here. How do you feel about that?
I feel awful. I feel like I'm letting a friend down. That's what I feel like. It's not a nice thing to do. This is supposed to be like a family. We're a broad church, the Conservative Party, and I take no pleasure in this. But at the end of the day, we have to have standards.
Despite the undoubted collapse in support for Boris Johnson among the backbenches here today, party rules currently state that he's safe in his position for a year after winning that confidence vote last month. That's why, right now, Tory MPs are meeting in a room at the top of these stairs to discuss changing those party rules to hold a new vote in the coming days. And finding Tory MPs today willing to say they'd support him in another vote was not easy. Are you still supporting the Prime Minister?
Oh, absolutely. I think he's doing a great job, and I think he'll lead us into the next general election.
Seriously?
Absolutely.
Why do so many of your colleagues now disagree with you, though, Peter Bone? You are increasingly in the minority, aren't you?
Well, I think that's unfair. I don't think I'm in a minority. What's happened is that a few have resigned from government.
But even those cabinet ministers who haven't quit hardly sound convinced.
Do you have confidence in him? The Prime Minister is absolutely still in place. He's still kept me in my role, and I will continue to serve that.
But tonight the odds don't look good for Boris Johnson. Any takers on that?
80% of bets have gone on him to leave in 2022 in the last 24 hours.
The punters have made up their minds, whatever the Prime Minister now tells his party. Well, that meeting of the 1922 committee I mentioned has happened. They have decided not to change the rules this week to hold a new confidence vote in Boris Johnson. Instead, on Monday, they'll hold fresh elections for their executive committee, and then they'll decide whether or not to change the rules. What they're essentially saying to Boris Johnson now is, we are going to change these rules in the next few weeks. The threat, they hope, will be enough to convince him to leave. What they're saying by not changing them this week is saying to the cabinet, go and tell the Prime Minister he has to go. The question now is whether Boris Johnson is listening to anyone.
OK, Daniel Hewitt, just a few hundred metres from where we are at Westminster. Thank you. OK, well, let's cross to our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Astana now, who's been in Parliament all day and is in Central Lobby tonight. So, Anushka, what are they saying to you? What's the mood there?
I'd say the mood in the Conservative Party is something between very, very angry and really quite sad. It doesn't matter who I message on my phone right now. It doesn't matter how loyal they were to Boris Johnson. They all think that it is over for the Prime Minister. I've just come off the phone from two cabinet ministers who are not in Downing Street right now, but who are still in the cabinet. Both of them said it is over. It is not tenable anymore. And among those ministers who are inside Downing Street, one of the arguments they are making to the Prime Minister is this is not about loyalty. It is about being able to govern. One pointed out that something like 3 departments now don't have ministers below cabinet level. And beyond that, they all know that there has been an avalanche of no confidence letters to the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, who has gone in himself to talk to the Prime Minister to tell him that this is not something that can continue. Boris Johnson wants to continue because of that big mandate in 2019, but it's getting almost impossible to argue that anymore.
OK, for the moment, Anushka Astana in Central Lobby there. Thank you. Well, beyond Westminster, how are today's political acts really playing out? Our social affairs correspondent, Sarah Corker, has visited North Yorkshire, and in the former Chancellor's constituency of Richmond, views about the Prime Minister's fortunes were mixed.
This affluent corner of North Yorkshire is firm Tory territory. But as the cost of living squeeze intensifies, some of Northallerton's market traders have lost faith in the government's ability to govern.
They don't live in the real world. The multimillionaires, most of them, they're not going to feel the pinch. They're not going to go to the petrol station and think, heck, it's nearly £2, I'm not going to fill up. These price increases are just crippling small businesses.
A few stalls down, Liam's struggling to pay the petrol to deliver groceries.
It's just the price of fuel is just extortion, isn't it? I don't think they have a clue what it's like to be people on here like this. I don't think they have a clue at all. Especially Rishi, I didn't think he had a clue either.
Are you sad that he's not Chancellor anymore?
No, I'm not sad at all about that.
At the Tickle Toby Inn, sisters Deba and Farah run two businesses on the high street. Both still support Boris Johnson's government, but want more help for companies under pressure.
Electricity is practically double, but you can't double a coffee. You can't double an ice cream. Obviously, all my suppliers have all gone up.
Boris handled things really well in lockdown, and so did Rishi, extremely well. Now, I think they could do more, really. But it's slightly worrying now Rishi has stepped down.
Rishi Sunak remains popular amongst local business owners here in Northallerton. But with a new man, a new Chancellor moving into number 11, there will be renewed focus on how to deal with the rising cost of living at a time when inflation is already at a 40-year high. 20 miles up the road in Yarm, living on a pension is getting harder. Pam is a Conservative councillor. She's also working 2 jobs at the age of 72 to cover the bills.
There's no government going on. They're not dealing with the issues, and the issues are economy, tax, fuel.
Did you want Boris Johnson to go?
Personally, no, I don't.
Back on the high street, politics is polarising opinion.
Well, the government is focused on preserving Boris Johnson in power. It's incompetent and systemically corrupt.
The government is for us and for our living and looking after your own, and we're not really doing that at the moment.
And I think that's what frustrates people, is that we've got more important issues to deal with at home.
This is a world away from Westminster, and some here believe the Prime Minister still has time to turn things around. Sarah Corker, ITV News.
Well, as we've just been hearing from Sarah Corker there, it's the cost of living crisis rather than the drama of Westminster that's really at the forefront of minds right across the country. And helping family finances represents a huge challenge to the new Chancellor. Now, who knows how long Nadhim Zahawi will actually be in office, but he started work this morning with a bulging in-tray. Our economics editor, Joel Hills, is at the Treasury. Joel, new Chancellor, but he is plagued, isn't he, with the same old problems?
He is also, as Robert was reporting, 24 hours after becoming Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi is over at Downing Street telling the Prime Minister who appointed him he cannot remain in his post. It is an extraordinary situation. Nadhim Zahawi, as Chancellor, faces 2 big problems. Inflation is high and rising, and the economy sits basically on the edge of a recession. Today he was out and about telling people that he would be promising a return to growth, to bear down on inflation, while also helping people who are struggling and showing fiscal discipline. All perfectly sensible. His predecessor's aims were absolutely identical. Rishi Sunak's plan was to allow the Bank of England to raise interest rates to relieve the upward pressure on prices, while he made sure that the need for interest rate rises was limited by keeping borrowing and debt under control. That strategy, as we now know, put him on collision course with Boris Johnson. The instinct at number 10 has been to borrow more for lower taxes and to do more to support people who are struggling. Nadhim Zahawi's first decision as Chancellor is going to be whether to top up the financial support that's already on offer. Doing so is possible, but the support's already considerable and runs the risk, obviously, of creating more inflation. Nadhim Zahawi may also decide to cut taxes, or at least prevent them from rising by less than they are currently on course to. He said this morning that he's reviewing every policy. He may end up, obviously, Mary, deciding not to change very much at all. He may end up, of course, working for someone completely different.
All right. Joel Hills at the Treasury, thank you. Now, whatever happens next, public opinion is certainly set to be tested right across the UK. And tonight our Scotland reporter Louise Scott is in Glasgow. Amy Lewis is in Tamworth, the seat currently held by Chris Pincher, the MP whose behaviour triggered this latest crisis. And Carl Dinnan is in Uxbridge, the Prime Minister's constituency. Well, first let's go to Louise. And Scotland sets a particular backdrop, doesn't it, to the Prime Minister's woes?
Well, he's had pockets of support north of the border, but for the vast majority of Scots, they want to see him go. And that opinion is replicated amongst the political parties here. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross, well, he's had an uncomfortable relationship with the Prime Minister. He was one of the first senior Conservatives calling for him to resign following Partygate. He then withdrew that, saying it wasn't the time due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Now he's calling for Boris to go, to the relief of his party, who've had to keep up with changing opinions, all while defending the union with a Prime Minister who doesn't help their case. The SNP, well, they see this as another reason there should be a second independence referendum. But despite the Westminster leader calling for a general election in the Commons today, the reality is they don't want one anytime soon, at least until the Supreme Court replies to their constitutional question as to whether the process would be legal. And the Prime Minister, well, he bolsters support for independence here. I mean, in the past few hours, he's had the time to formally reply to the First Minister's request for a Section 30 order, saying now is not the time.
Well, I'm 100 miles away from Westminster in Tamworth in Staffordshire, but this is where the latest political mess started for Boris Johnson. It is because it is the seat that is currently held by Chris Pincher, one of his allies. Now, Boris Johnson has apologised for promoting his ally when he was aware of some of the allegations, but nonetheless, Chris Pincher remains the MP for this constituency. He has a majority of around 20,000 voters. In other words, this would ordinarily be seen as a safe Conservative seat. So with that in mind, I have been speaking to local voters and asking them if there was an election now, who they would vote for. They've been telling me that some, although not all, believe it is time that Boris stood down.
How did you vote at the last election?
Conservative.
Are you happy with that choice?
I was, but not so much now.
Why?
Well, he's made a lot of mistakes.
Well, he's got himself into a load of trouble, but I think he'll get out of it.
For all that he's had to do with since he's got into office, I think he's done a good job.
I don't think he should stay as the Prime Minister because for what he's done. But I got to give him that he got us out of COVID.
I think there's nobody else at the moment that can take over, that people can. They know Boris for who he is and what he does.
Well, the one thing that the voters kept on saying was that they are fed up about hearing about all these scandals and said they want to hear about the things that matter, like the cost of living.
Even here in Boris Johnson's own constituency of Uxbridge, his behaviour has damaged his party's standing. That's been confirmed to me tonight by a local constituency association source. And that is pretty much the same as the picture across the rest of the country, I think. Most of the recent polls have given Labour a lead of between 6 and about 11 points. And potentially that could be a problem for whoever leads the Conservative Party next, because a poll from YouGov today has found that 56% of people think that if Boris Johnson resigns, then there should be a general election. So if we do have a new Conservative Party leader, they wouldn't have to call a general election, but they would be under pressure to do so, to renew their mandate, to get their own personal mandate right from the very start. How much of a problem that would be for a leader would then depend on how much of that 10-point deficit to Labour they would be able to reduce by the very fact of them not being Boris Johnson.
OK. Carl Dinnan in Uxbridge, Amy Lewis in Tamworth, Louise Scott in Glasgow. Thank you all. And we will, of course, keep you across all the latest developments here throughout the programme. But coming up after the break, some of the day's other news is coming up. The biggest ever crackdown on smuggling gangs. But will it actually stop people crossing the Channel? Why your summer holiday might now be in jeopardy after thousands more flights are cancelled. And we're counting down to the Lionesses taking on Austria for the start of the Women's Euros. All that and more from Downing Street after this break. See you then. And welcome back. We will have more on today's political developments, of course, later. But first, some of the day's other news. And dozens of suspected people traffickers have been arrested by police as part of the largest ever crackdown on smuggling gangs. The UK's National Crime Agency has joined with forces across Europe, and they're targeting the supply chains of what were described as barely seaworthy boats used to cross the English Channel. Our correspondent Rebecca Barry has more.
Dawn in South London. And this is what the full weight of coordinated European law enforcement looks like.
Police, you're under arrest. Come over here. Turn around. Hands behind your back.
Officers from the National Crime Agency in the biggest international police operation of its kind, targeting a prolific people smuggling gang.
They just want to make money. So they pack people into boats that can't take that number, they underpower them with small engines that can barely make them through the waves, and they don't really care whether the people live or die as long as they get their money at the end of the day.
And the message that this sends to those criminal gangs?
Is that right across Europe there's nowhere to hide.
Almost 13,000 people have made the treacherous journey across the Channel so far this year. The gang targeted in today's operation is suspected of smuggling up to 10,000 migrants in the last 18 months, making an estimated £13 million. The operation follows the arrest of a suspected gang leader in London 2 months ago. As a result, a series of coordinated raids took place in Germany, France and the Netherlands, with 40 people arrested. Officers seizing more than 100 boats, 50 engines and more than 1,000 life jackets. The Home Secretary believes her controversial plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda will help deter these dangerous crossings. Today, Priti Patel said these arrests send a clear message to the criminal gangs who are preying on vulnerable people across Europe and beyond. We will stop at nothing to end your sordid trade, bring you to justice and save lives.
Buy this car for me.
In the words of one European prosecutor, this unprecedented cooperation makes the world a little safer today. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
The man charged with killing people in a parade shooting in Illinois on Monday has confessed to police that he did fire on the crowd. Robert E. Cremo faces 7 counts of murder over the shooting in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park. Here, a woman who was killed in London as she returned home after an evening out died from head and neck injuries, a coroner has heard. 35-year-old Zara Alina was walking in Ilford when she was attacked in the early hours of the 26th of June. 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney has been charged with her murder. And the heads of the UK and US security services have made an unprecedented joint appearance to warn of the threat from China. MI5 says it is now running 7 times as many investigations into the activities of the Chinese Communist Party as compared to 5 years ago. British Airways has announced it's cancelling a further 10,000 short-haul flights between now and October. It's become one of the worst affected airlines for disruption, having axed 13% of its flights already this summer. But by doing so, it says it hopes to protect as many holiday flights as possible. Martha Fairley explains.
Just weeks before the summer holidays get underway, British Airways has dealt its passengers more bad news, announcing it's cutting a further 10,300 short-haul flights until the end of October. In a move likely to affect the plans of hundreds of thousands of Brits flying to European destinations, it said the latest cuts to flights from Heathrow and Gatwick were regrettably necessary to ease disruption.
The aim of these cancellations is to avoid all the scenes of chaos that we've seen at airports so far this summer. Yes, it's going to cheese off 1 million passengers who thought that they had confirmed reservations, but British Airways is taking the view that that's less damaging than seeing people having their flights cancelled on the day.
Today's announcement will affect almost 50 return flights per day and comes on top of 17,600 flights that were cancelled up to the end of June, meaning BA has now axed 13% of its summer schedule. The carrier is one of the worst affected by cancellations and delays caused by staff shortages since air travel resumed following lockdown.
BA says the vast majority of its services remain in operation. It's contacting customers whose flights have been cancelled to apologise and offer to rebook them or issue a full refund. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
You are watching the ITV Evening News. It's just gone 7 o'clock and we are here in Downing Street after a pretty whirlwind 24 hours in Westminster, and we have more developments coming for you yet. Tonight, Boris Johnson's position as Prime Minister seems in peril as more and more ministers call for him to quit. But if he won't go, how many more will join the dozens of MPs who've already left the government in protest? Still to come, we'll have more reaction to a day of drama at Downing Street, plus away from Westminster.
I'm at Old Trafford, where England's Lionesses are set to kick off this summer's Euros in what could be a life-changing month for them.
I'm at the fan zone for what's been dubbed the biggest women's sporting event in European history as the Euros begins.
And I'm in Richmond, where I'm going to bring you news of a warm few days ahead. It may even turn into a heatwave.
So all of that still to come then. But first, let's cross over to the Houses of Parliament, where our Deputy Political Editor Anushka Astana is joined tonight by the Conservative MP Sir Charles Walker. Anushka.
Thank you, Mary. And that's right, I've been talking to MPs all day, and right now I'm joined by the MP for Broxbourne, Sir Charles Walker. Thank you for being here with us right now. Sir Charles, in December 2019, the Tory party led by Boris Johnson got a huge majority. It was such a kind of positive atmosphere in the party. What has happened to lead it to going so low now?
Well, I think obviously the pandemic was a very hard taskmaster. It was the country went through a simply awful and ghastly experience, and it was always going to be very difficult for whoever.
But this isn't about the pandemic, is it?
But it is. This is a hangover from that. We all know mistakes were made. The Prime Minister's admitted mistakes were made. But I mean, today is today, and quite frankly, you can't govern a country without a government, and the Prime Minister's lost about a quarter to a third of his government. So in essence,
is he about to resign, do you think?
I think he probably is. I mean, you can be in number 10, but you can't govern from number 10 without a ministerial team.
And you mentioned Partygate, which was the scandal before the latest scandal, and I remember how angry you were when the Partygate revelations came out. Why did that not lead your colleagues to this point?
Well, I think it's all built up, hasn't it? So obviously there was the confidence vote 3 weeks ago that was very much linked to Partygate. The Prime Minister won that 59 to 41%, but then there was obviously what happened last week with a senior whip, and I'm afraid this sort of cumulative drip has led us to this point today where many colleagues feel that they can't continue under his leadership, and that started last night obviously with the resignation of 2 senior cabinet ministers, and actually a week ago it started when Oliver Dowden, the party chairman, resigned after the by-election defeat.
And how much is it about trust? How much is there a feeling that he wasn't telling the truth again?
I mean, that's clearly where a lot of this problem of the last few days stems from. But the fact is, whatever the reason is, the Prime Minister has lost the confidence of his ministers and his parliamentary party, and you simply can't continue when that happens, and I suspect the Prime Minister will resign later tonight.
Do you feel sorry for him?
Of course I feel sorry for him. This isn't fun for anyone. I mean, some of your viewers might be taking some pleasure in it. I'm a colleague of the Prime Minister's. He's always been perfectly kind and generous to me, gone out of his way to communicate and chat with me, so I take no pleasure in this. But it is just a fact. If you haven't got a government, you can't govern.
And he says that he has a mandate. 14 million people voted for him.
No, they didn't.
And
we don't work like that. We don't have a presidential system. They voted for the Conservative Party, which he led brilliantly at the time. But it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. And he is a student of history, and he knows it doesn't work like that.
And just finally, what is it that you think's made people so angry today? What has led to this avalanche?
It started on Thursday, moved into Friday. The story about what was known about the senior whip in number 10 changed about 5 times, and I just think people have lost confidence. I know people have lost confidence. I'm talking to colleagues.
Very quickly, who would you like to see as the next Conservative leader?
Well, we still have a leader. We've got to wait for that resignation to come, as I believe it will imminently, and then those who feel they can lead our party and de facto become Prime Minister can put themselves forward.
So no one for now?
No one for now.
Sir Charles, thank you very much. Mary?
All right, Anushka Astana, thank you very much indeed. Robert's here, we've been listening to this together. What did you make of what Charles Walker said?
So, Charles Walker, a very senior Tory MP, saying that he thinks the Prime Minister is going to resign within the next few hours. That is significant. However, I have to say, I spent the afternoon in a committee room in Parliament, watching the Prime Minister being interrogated by the most powerful committee chairman, very senior MPs, and not for an instant did the Prime Minister imply he was thinking of resigning. He kept going on about all the things he wanted to do. Now, some people would say he is in denial, and as I talked to you earlier about the fact that he can't escape the maths, that a majority of his MPs seem to be against him, that he can't govern with, maybe a third of his government, Charles Walker thinks. I think it's more like a quarter of his government having resigned. Either way, ministers are in there telling him, you can't function, the government can't function while you're leader. But he will do everything he can to dissuade him, and there are some loyalties. Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, is in there. She loves Boris Johnson. Do you think Nadine is saying to Boris...
She might be. She might. If they all tell him no, you've got to go, how can he not?
So there was this extraordinary moment in this thing called the Liaison Committee, which I was sitting in on, where William Ragg and Bernard Jenkins, two very influential MPs, said to the Prime Minister, would you call a general election to save yourself, to stop the party throwing you out? And actually, what was really striking, and they got very agitated, he at no point promised them that he would not. Now, for what it's worth, I think the Tory party will stop him calling a general election. I don't expect that, but it was, I think, a powerful symbol of how little he wants to go. I think he probably will go in the next few hours, but it's not done till it's done.
All right, and the cars are lining up outside. The cabinet ministers possibly are about to leave, and we'll try and read their expressions and draw some conclusions, maybe. But in the meantime, away from Westminster and to the drama of sport, where it's the first day of the Women's Euros in just under an hour. England face Austria in the opening match at a sold-out Old Trafford, and that's ahead of next week's clash with Northern Ireland, who are through to their first major tournament. With the excitement building, the Lionesses say they are embracing the chance to shine, as they told our sports editor Steve Scott.
It's coming up! It's coming up!
For players and for fans alike, this evening could be the start of something very special. A full house at Old Trafford, the vast majority urging the Lionesses to get these home Euros off to a flying start.
They're going to win, absolutely, 100%. I know they're going to win. I can feel it. We're going to win tonight, 3-0. Yeah, I think it's going to be amazing. It's really going to be great for women's football.
It's something I've been waiting almost a year and a half for. I'm just beyond excited about it. I'm so glad that it's happening now, and I think it's going to be huge for the women's games.
I'm excited and England's going to win!
As a Manchester United player, Ella Toone is familiar with the surroundings, if not the magnitude of the occasion.
It's an amazing stadium and massive part of me and my family, so yeah, to walk out for England at Old Trafford is something that will stick with me for life.
I mean, you've played there before, obviously, but not in front of 75,000.
No, not in front of that many. Yeah, obviously the crowd that we had last time was big, but this is something else.
While the squad is well aware of the huge opportunity that lies ahead, Captain Leah Williamson says it will not overwhelm them. Quite the opposite, in fact.
We know what it is, we know what to expect, and we're ready for it. But yeah, I think everybody's got their own things in place now to be able to deal with it, and pressure's a privilege. So it's something that we're embracing.
With tonight a sellout, those without a front row seat have had to find other ways to join the party. All of them hoping this time England will end that interminable wait for a major football trophy. Pop-up fan parks around the country playing host to thousands, including perhaps the next generation of Lionesses. For the current pride, the moment has nearly arrived. Everything is in place. Now it's up to them. Steve Scott, ITV News, Manchester.
Well, as Steve was saying, a capacity crowd, almost 75,000 strong, is expected in time for kick-off. But those tickets sold out back in April, meaning fan zones are now the best bet for those hoping to watch the match tonight. And Sangeeta Lal is in central Manchester. Sangeeta, what's the atmosphere like?
Everyone's really excited. They've just started to make their way in to find their seats to watch the game on the big screen, and more people will be watching than ever before. A record-breaking 500,000 tickets have been sold for this year's tournament. That's twice the number sold in 2017 when it was last held in the Netherlands. But to put it into some context of how far the women's game has come, the last time England hosted was in 2005, only shown in venues across the northwest. This year, though, it's being shown across the country and, importantly, to sell-out crowds. So tonight, more than 70,000 people will be watching at Old Trafford, and when the tournament ends at Wembley Stadium, that's sold out too. And the former England women's captain who led the team in 1984 said that playing in front of a sold-out Wembley Stadium would have been in her wildest dreams. And so many people I've spoken to here today have told me how happy they are that the game is finally getting the recognition they said it always deserved.
We've seen how much the men's team can bring the nation together, and we're starting to see how much the women's team can bring together, and it's really nice to see as well.
Men have had all the money, all the stardom, everything on a plate. Now it's time for the ladies.
I've been following for years, and it's brilliant to see so many people, because I follow England men and women. It's so good to see so many people out to see the women.
So, kick-off is in less than an hour at 8 o'clock. The Duke of Cambridge himself today wished the Lionesses good luck, and that is certainly what everyone here will be wishing too.
All right, Sangeeta Lal, thank you. And now let's straight away return to Steve Scott, who's at Old Trafford. So, Steve, what are England's chances, do you think, tonight, and indeed, in the tournament itself?
Mary, I think they're very, very good. Why do I say that? Well, they've got a team rammed full of very, very good players. This is a home Euro, so they're not going to lack for any support at all. They're unbeaten in their last 14 games under Serena Wiegman. And Wiegman, of course, when she was manager of the Netherlands, she actually won the Euros. They're the best funded team here, and I think everyone would agree that when it comes to strength and depth, they've got the best squad. So it could be a life-changing month ahead for the Lionesses and for the women's game too. And I think it needs it really after COVID. Crowds have been slow to come back to watch the top flight games in England, but this tournament could change all that. So the opportunity is certainly here. It's now up to the players.
All right, Steve Scott, thank you. Still to come here, I'll be having a final chat with Robert about today's extraordinary political events, and Grant Shapps has just left extremely quickly in the Range Rover that was behind me a couple of minutes ago. But what could happen next?
And I'm here with the latest on the warm weather to come and how the temperatures could reach the high 20s.
And we will be back after this short break. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome back. Now, far from the political storm clouds gathering here, there is much brighter weather due in the days ahead, and it could see some top temperatures pushing the high 20s within the next week. Alex is in West London tonight, so Alex, warmer weather coming soon.
That's right, Marion. As you say, well, there's certainly no storm clouds here at the moment. Certainly some late spells of sunshine just pushing through, and beside the River Thames in Richmond, to be precise, where it has been a fairly pleasant day all round. In fact, we took a few shots earlier, people on the water enjoying themselves, rowing up and down, and yeah, it did really feel quite pleasant. We've seen temperatures into the mid-20s, and as you hinted, it will be rising as we head through the next few days. In fact, if we take a look at the pressure and air mass chart, you can see what's going to happen. We've got high pressure which is really establishing itself over the UK at the moment, so day on day it will get a little bit warmer. We're also going to pull in that warmer air from the near continent, so by the time we get to the end of the week, I suspect temperatures could be at around 28, maybe 29 degrees Celsius, and there is some signs that this warm weather could last into the weekend and into next week as well. And I suspect some areas will hit their heat wave threshold, but we'll have to keep a watchful eye on that. Let's take a look at the details then for the next couple of days.
With sizzling temperatures, there's a chance this feel-good weather will continue. Heinz Beans Burgers, sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, it certainly is going to be staying warm over the next few days. Slightly more changeable conditions up towards the northwest, but nothing really to worry about. In fact, if we take a look at the pressure charts, I know we looked at it just now with the air mass, but if we focus up towards the northwest, you'll notice there are some weak weather fronts trying to push in, but as they bump in to the high pressure, which is going to be across much of the UK, they will start to fade out. So prepare for a few bits and pieces of rain across the northwest as we head through the next 24 hours. As for this evening, well, for many areas it stays largely on the dry and fine side, but we are going to see that weak weather front which has been up across the northwest throughout today, making its way further south. So clouding over somewhat across the southern half of Britain. Elsewhere, though, it starts to turn on the clearer side. So as we start tomorrow, it'll be a brighter, sunnier start across Scotland and Northern Ireland, northern parts of England. But as we head through the day, even the cloud, which will be with us first thing tomorrow in the south, will start to break up quite nicely. So I suspect as we push on into the afternoon, say 1, 2, 3 o'clock, it will be largely sunny skies overhead. Temperatures in the south reaching around 24 to 26 degrees Celsius, reaching the low 20s further north. And then for Friday, it's going to be warmer still with a high of 28 possible. But as we push into the weekend, we will start to see the heat becoming more evenly spread. So temperatures in the high 20s possible as we get towards the back end of the weekend into next week.
Heinz Beans Burgers sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, that's how it's looking here in Richmond, Mary. Quite lovely with some late evening sunshine. Hope you've got a bit of sunshine where you are.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. It's pure storm clouds here, let me tell you. Let's return to Robert Peston for a final thought. I lose count of the number of times I've asked you over the last couple of years, can he cling on? Is this the end for Boris Johnson? Is this the end for the Prime Minister, do you think?
Well, he is a politician more focused on staying in that house, more focused than any I've ever encountered in my life. He doesn't want to go. But the numbers are categorically against him. Probably now more than a half of his MPs, including his ministers, want him to go. But the more fundamental problem is the government cannot function just given the sheer numbers of ministers and aides who have quit, nudging 40, something like a quarter of the government. His own senior team have been delivering the message to him that while he is leader, the government simply can't do the work that it's needed to do. Now, I was slightly amazed that in the liaison committee this afternoon, when he was talking to senior MPs, committee chair people, he said there was a wealth of talent he could draw on to replace these people. But I have to say that is not what his ministers believe, are telling me and are telling him. So I do believe that, as we heard from Charles Walker, senior Tory MP on this programme, he will go within hours. So it's going to be a long night for him, a long night for all of us who are watching, and a long night for the country, because this is a very significant moment.
We saw Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, revving away, having left the meeting, presumably. What does that tell us? There are others still inside.
The significant thing for me about Grant Shapps is this. Grant Shapps was one of the most important people in 2019 who ran his campaign to become Tory leader and Prime Minister. And I know that Grant Shapps has said to him tonight, it is time for you to go, Prime Minister. So when
Robert,
an ultra-loyalist like that says him to go, he's gone.
We're out of time. That's it from us. Julie's here at 10. Bye-bye.